Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I didn't expect the night to shift with a single step, but the moment his hand found the wall beside my head, everything changed. The air thickened. My breath caught somewhere between resistance and surrender. I was pressed tight against the cool surface, aware of the steady warmth of his presence, the deliberate closeness that felt less like accident and more like intention. And across the room my husband stood frozen, watching. Silent, his expression unreadable yet heavy with something dangerously close to recognition. No one spoke, no one needed to. The party still hummed behind us. Soft music, distant laughter, glasses clinking, but it all felt far away, muted beneath the current pulling the three of us into something unspoken. His body didn't quite touch mine, not fully, but it was close enough that I felt every subtle shift of his breathing. Close enough that the space between us felt charged, alive, like a wire stretched too tight. I should have stepped away. I should have turned my head, laughed it off, found my husband's hand and ended whatever this was before it began. But I didn't, because this wasn't new. The tension had been building for months, lingering glances over dinner tables, conversations that lasted a little too long, jokes that carried hidden weight. It had always stopped just short of crossing a line. Always controlled, always careful. Tonight though, something had slipped. Or maybe something had finally been allowed. His fingers brushed the wall near my shoulder, not touching me, yet the absence of contact felt louder than a grip would have. The restraint was deliberate. That was what made it powerful. It wasn't force, it was control, the kind that asked a question without words. Across the room my husband's jaw tightened. He wasn't a weak man. He wasn't oblivious. If anything, he had sensed this current long before I admitted it to myself. There had been a strange electricity between the three of us whenever we shared a space, an awareness that flickered beneath polite smiles and casual conversations. A push and pull no one named, and now it stood fully alive between us. My heart pounded not from fear but from the unbearable awareness of being seen, of being wanted, of standing at the center of something fragile and dangerous. I felt the weight of both men in different ways, one close enough to feel his breath against my cheek, the other standing back, observing, measuring, deciding. Was this a test? Was it permission? Or was it the beginning of something none of us were prepared to control? His eyes held mine, searching for hesitation, for refusal. I gave him neither. Instead I let the silence stretch, let the tension speak. My husband took a slow step forward, then stopped again, as if even he wasn't certain what role he was meant to play in this moment. The dangerous part wasn't the closeness, it was the restraint. No one moved further, no one crossed the final boundary. But the energy between us grew heavier, coiling tight around our ribs, demanding release while daring us to maintain composure. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, wind howling in your ears, knowing one more shift could send everything spiraling. And still, none of us looked away. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about impulse. It was about power, about who would claim it, who would surrender it, and whether the lines we'd drawn around ourselves were ever real to begin with. Because when his thumb finally brushed lightly against my wrist, just enough to test the balance, the look in my husband's eyes told me this night wasn't ending the way it began. And I had the unsettling feeling that none of us truly wanted it to. The brush of his thumb against my wrist lingered longer than it should have. It wasn't possessive, it wasn't rough, it was careful, almost questioning. But the softness of it sent a pulse straight through me, a spark that made the silence between us louder than any music still drifting from the other room. My husband saw it. I knew he did because his shoulders squared and something shifted in his stance. Not anger, not yet. It was something deeper. Awareness. Calculation. As if he were watching a chess move unfold in slow motion, deciding whether to interrupt or let it play out. "Are you okay?" the man in front of me murmured, his voice low enough that it felt meant only for me. The question was simple. The meaning wasn't. His hand dropped from the wall, but he didn't step back. Instead he searched my face as if waiting for a sign. A boundary, a line he wouldn't cross unless I drew it first. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice came out softer than I intended. Fine wasn't the right word. Aware was. Aware of how close he stood. Aware of how my pulse refused to settle. Aware of the fact that my husband still hadn't moved to claim the space between us. For a moment the three of us existed in a fragile triangle of restraint. He leaned slightly closer, not enough to touch but enough that I felt the warmth of his breath near my cheek. "You don't look fine." His words brushed against me the way his fingers had, light, testing, dangerous in their gentleness. I swallowed, My husband took another slow step forward. The sound of his shoes against the floor felt louder than it was. A quiet declaration that he was no longer just observing. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough now that I felt his presence behind me, solid, steady, grounding. If the man in front of me was heat, my husband was gravity. "You seem comfortable," my husband said evenly, his tone calm but layered with something sharp beneath the surface. The air tightened again. The man in front of me didn't look away. "I'm not doing anything she doesn't want." It was subtle, respectful, and yet the implication vibrated between them. My husband's gaze flicked to me, not accusing, not protective, just searching, and in that look I saw it. The question he wasn't asking aloud. "Do you want this?" My heart pounded so hard I was sure they could both hear it. I hadn't planned for this, none of us had, and yet it felt like we had been circling this moment for months, dancing around something inevitable. "I don't know what this is," I whispered, more to myself than to either of them. The confession hung there, fragile and honest. The man in front of me softened slightly at that. His hand hovered near my waist, hesitated, then settled lightly at my side, careful, open, ready to withdraw at the smallest sign of resistance. The contact was barely there, but it sent warmth spiraling through me. My husband exhaled slowly behind me. His hand came to rest at my lower back, not forceful, not claiming, just there. A reminder. A connection. The touch grounded me and unsettled me at the same time. Two different energies meeting through me, neither overpowering, both restrained. "I'm right here," my husband said quietly. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise, and suddenly the tension shifted from confrontation to something far more complicated. Not rivalry, not dominance, but awareness of shared control, shared restraint, as if we were all holding a fragile thread, careful not to snap it. The man in front of me leaned back just enough to create a sliver of space, though his hand remained warm at my side. "We can step away," he offered, "if you want." But none of us moved, because stepping away would mean admitting this was a mistake. And standing here meant admitting it wasn't. My breath came shallow, my thoughts tangled between loyalty and longing. The heat wasn't explosive. It was slow, coiled, building with every measured word and careful touch. I realized then that what held us back wasn't fear. It was choice. And the most dangerous thing about this moment wasn't that we might lose control. It was that we were all still very much in it. No one moved. But something inside me did. The space between us felt thinner now, like glass about to fracture under pressure. His hand still rested at my side, my husband's palm steady at my lower back. Two anchors. Two different kinds of heat. And somewhere in the center of it all, me trying to steady the storm rising beneath my ribs. "We should go back," I said softly, though my feet didn't follow the suggestion. The words sounded practical, responsible, safe. Neither man answered. Instead, his thumb shifted slightly against my waist, barely a movement, but enough to make my breath hitch. My husband felt it. I knew he did because his hand tightened almost imperceptibly against my back. That's when I realized the real obstacle standing between us wasn't the room, or the guests, or even the line we hadn't crossed. It was history. Years of marriage, shared mornings, quiet apologies, unspoken disappointments. The comfortable rhythm my husband and I had built together, steady, reliable, sometimes too predictable. And somewhere along the way the spark we once guarded so fiercely had dulled into something calmer, warmer, safer. And this was not safe. The man in front of me had always represented something unfinished. A possibility that had never been explored. A conversation that ended too soon months ago when timing wasn't right, and loyalty was unquestioned. We had both chosen distance then, but distance hadn't erased the charge. His eyes dropped to my lips for half a second before lifting again, and that small, almost unconscious gesture felt louder than any confession. He caught himself, pulled back just slightly. Not because he didn't want to close the space, but because he did. My husband stepped closer behind me, enough that I felt his chest against my shoulder blades. The warmth was grounding, familiar, protective but not possessive. His breath brushed near my ear. "You don't have to prove anything," he murmured quietly. The words startled me. Prove what? That I was loyal? That I wasn't tempted? That I wasn't curious about the way another man's touch could make my pulse race in a way I hadn't felt in years? I closed my eyes for a brief second, overwhelmed by the weight of being seen from two different directions. "I'm not trying to," I whispered. The man in front of me let his hand fall away then, creating space that felt colder than it should have. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger but restraint. "We said we wouldn't blur lines," he said quietly, almost to himself. There it was, a secret agreement, a boundary drawn months ago in the middle of a conversation that had lasted too long and gone too deep. We had promised ourselves we wouldn't let curiosity turn into consequence. But promises feel different when you're standing this close. My eyes met his again. For a heartbeat the world narrowed to just us. The music faded, the party disappeared. The only thing that existed was the unbearable pull to lean forward that last inch. He moved first, not forward, back. One slow step, creating distance that felt like denial. His hand dragged lightly across my fingertips as he withdrew an accidental graze that sent electricity up my arm. I inhaled sharply. My husband felt that too. His hand slid from my lower back to my waist, turning me gently not away from the other man but slightly toward him, not shielding me, not pulling me back. Just repositioning. It wasn't ownership, it was choice. The three of us stood there again, but the air had changed. Thicker, heavier, charged with everything we weren't saying. "If we stay here," the man in front of me said quietly, "this gets harder." He wasn't wrong. Because the longer we stood suspended in restraint, the more undeniable the longing became. It wasn't reckless, it wasn't impulsive, it was slow burning and deliberate, the kind that seeps under your skin and lingers long after logic tells you to walk away. My husband's fingers tightened once more at my waist, not in warning but in silent acknowledgement. We all felt it, the pull, the risk, the hunger to step forward, and the equal fear of what would happen if we did. For a brief suspended second, he leaned in close enough that our foreheads almost touched. Almost. Then he stopped. Because wanting it too much can be more terrifying than not wanting it at all. And none of us were ready to admit just how much we did. The silence stretched so tightly it felt like it might snap. He was still close, close enough that if I leaned forward even slightly there would be no pretending this was accidental. My husband's hand remained steady at my waist, not restraining me, not guiding me, just there. Present, grounded, and somehow that made everything worse. Because this wasn't chaos, it was control. "Say it," he murmured softly. I didn't know which one of them I was supposed to answer. The man in front of me searched my face like he was memorizing it. His restraint had become visible now, etched into the way his jaw flexed, the way his fingers curled slightly at his sides as if holding himself back. "Say what?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "That you don't feel it," he replied. The words landed between us like a match dropped into dry air. My husband's breath shifted behind me, subtle but heavier. I felt the rise and fall of his chest against my back. He wasn't stopping this, he wasn't interrupting, he was listening. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Because denying it would have been the lie. The truth hung in my throat, thick and dangerous. I felt it in the way my pulse refused to slow. In the way my skin reacted to proximity alone. In the way the space between us felt charged with something alive. "I tried not to," I whispered finally. That was it. The confession. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. His eyes darkened, not with possession, not with triumph, but with something softer. Relief. As if he'd been carrying the same weight alone. My husband's fingers tightened slightly at my waist again. "I know," he said quietly behind me. And that broke something open. Not anger, not jealousy, but acknowledgement. We had all been pretending this tension was imagined. A coincidence, a passing spark. But sparks don't linger for months. They don't grow stronger in silence. They don't survive distance unless something deeper feeds them. The man in front of me lifted his hand slowly, deliberately, giving me every second to pull away. I didn't. His fingers brushed my cheek, soft, careful, barely there, but it felt like standing in the center of lightning. My breath caught, and my husband exhaled slowly behind me, his forehead nearly brushing my hair now. The three of us suspended in a single fragile moment. No one rushed, no one claimed. The touch wasn't ownership, it was recognition. "You have no idea what you do to a room when you walk into it," he whispered, his thumb grazing just beneath my jaw. The words weren't about beauty. They were about presence. Power. My knees felt unsteady but I didn't fall. My husband's hand remained firm, grounding me. Steady. As if reminding me that whatever this was, it wasn't happening in secret. It was happening in truth. I turned my head slightly, just enough that my cheek brushed more fully into his palm. That small movement felt louder than a kiss. And for one suspended heartbeat, he leaned closer. So close that our foreheads nearly touched again. So close that the air between our lips felt shared. My husband shifted behind me, not pulling me back, not pushing me forward, just present in the current. The heat wasn't frantic, it was slow, deliberate, hungry in a way that terrified me because it wasn't impulsive. It was wanted, all three of us breathing the same air. All three aware that the next inch would change everything. I shouldn't, he whispered. But he didn't step away. And I didn't either. The space between us thinned to nothing. One more second. One more breath. One more choice. And the moment hovered there, trembling, alive, right before it would finally break. Rain began sometime after midnight. At first it was only a whisper against the windows, soft, uncertain. Then it grew steadier. A slow rhythm tapping against the glass as if the sky itself had decided to exhale. The party had thinned. The lights were lower now, warmer. Shadows stretched long across the walls, blurring edges, softening lines. And somewhere between one breath and the next, we stopped pretending. No one announced it, no one asked permission. It happened in the quiet way storms sometimes do, building for hours before finally breaking. The room felt smaller, or maybe we stood closer. My husband's hand slid from my waist to lace gently with my fingers. Not holding me back. Holding with me. The man in front of me stepped forward again, slower this time. Not testing, not questioning, certain. The rain pressed harder against the windows. You're shaking, he murmured. I know, I whispered. But I wasn't afraid. The first real touch wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was a careful closing of distance, the warmth of his chest against mine. The steady rise and fall of his breath aligning with my own. My husband moved closer behind me, his presence firm and grounding, his forehead resting lightly near my temple. 3 heartbeats. One rhythm. The air felt charged but no longer fragile. The tension that had held us apart for months melted into something fluid. Something chosen. His hand found mine first, threading fingers slowly, deliberately. My husband's hand mirrored it at my other side. There was no tug of war, no competition. Just shared electricity. Look at me, my husband whispered softly. I did. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't jealous. They were alive. And something in that look, something unspoken and daring, broke the final wall inside me. The man in front of me brushed his fingertips along my jaw again, but this time I didn't freeze. I leaned into it. My breath melted into his as our foreheads touched fully at last. The contact was light, almost reverent, yet it sent warmth spilling down my spine. Behind me, my husband's hand flattened against my stomach, steady and possessive in a way that felt protective rather than territorial. His breath mingled with mine, slow and controlled, but heavier now. Rain streaked the windows in silver lines. The room glowed amber, and the space between us disappeared. No urgency, no frantic movement, just closeness. Skin against skin through fabric, heat through layers. The slow realization that this was no longer about restraint. It was about surrendering to something that had already existed long before tonight. His lips hovered near mine, not claiming, just waiting. My husband's fingers tilted my chin slightly upward. Choice. Always choice. I closed my eyes. And when our lips finally met, it wasn't explosive. It was deep, slow. Breath shared more than taken. Behind me, my husband's touch grew firmer, anchoring me as if to say he wasn't losing me, he was here, in this, with me. Their hands found each other briefly across my waist, a silent understanding passing between them. Not rivalry, agreement. My pulse roared in my ears, but the moment felt strangely calm, like stepping into warm water after standing too long in the cold. Their bodies spoke the words we had been too careful to say. I felt claimed, not owned, desired, not taken, seen, not divided. Rain thundered now, loud enough to hide the sound of our breathing. The world outside blurred into silver streaks while inside everything sharpened, the brush of fingertips along my spine. The warmth of lips near my ear. The way my name sounded different when whispered from 2 directions. This wasn't chaos, it was release. Months of tension dissolving into a single shared exhale. And just when the moment began to tip into something even deeper, the lights flickered, thunder cracked overhead, and for a suspended second we froze again. Foreheads pressed together, breath tangled. Bodies aligned in a quiet, breathtaking storm, right on the edge of what would come next. Morning arrived quietly. The rain had stopped, but the world outside the windows still looked washed in silver. Streets damp, sky pale and undecided. The apartment felt different in daylight, softer, smaller, honest. I woke before either of them. For a moment I didn't move. I just listened to the slow rhythm of breathing in the room, to the faint hum of the city waking up. The night felt distant already, like something suspended outside of time. But it wasn't a dream. The air still carried the memory of it. My husband lay beside me, eyes open staring at the ceiling. He didn't look at me right away. His hand rested on his chest, fingers flexing slightly like he was replaying something in his mind. Across the room he stood near the window, fully dressed now, watching the light spill through the glass. His posture was still confident but quieter, less charged, more thoughtful. No one rushed to speak. Because what do you say the morning after you've crossed a line that no longer feels like a mistake? I pushed myself up slowly, the sheets cool against my skin. The space between the two men felt heavier in daylight, not tense, just aware. Are we okay? I asked softly. It wasn't directed at one of them. It was meant for both. My husband finally turned his head toward me. His expression wasn't angry, it wasn't broken, it was searching. I don't regret it, he said carefully. The honesty landed heavier than guilt would have. The man by the window exhaled, his breath fogging the glass slightly. Neither do I. That should have made things easier, but it didn't, because regret would have been simpler, cleaner, a mistake you could apologize for and move past. This felt intentional. I stood and walked toward the window, stopping a few feet away from him. In daylight the intensity between us looked different. Less storm, more ember. You were supposed to leave last night, I said quietly. He gave a small, almost rueful smile. I know. My husband sat up behind me, and I was supposed to stop it. Silence again. The truth settled in layers. This hadn't been about recklessness. It hadn't been about losing control. It had been about choice. And that realization was both terrifying and grounding. A knock at the door shattered the stillness. All three of us froze. No one expected visitors this early. My husband stood first, instinctively steady. The man near the window stepped back, distance returning between us in an instant, not because it was over but because the world had a way of intruding at the exact wrong time. Another knock, sharp, insistent. I felt my pulse quicken again, not with desire this time but reality. When my husband opened the door I couldn't see who stood on the other side, only the shift in his posture. Surprise, then something softer. It's my brother, he said over his shoulder, voice tight but controlled. He's in town early. Of course he was. Life doesn't pause for emotional earthquakes. The man near the window ran a hand through his hair, eyes flicking to me, not panicked, just aware that whatever this was, it couldn't stay suspended in isolation. We need to talk, my husband said quietly, once the door was closed again and his brother settled in the guest room down the hall. Not confrontational, not accusing, serious. I nodded, because that was the twist, wasn't it? The night hadn't broken us. It had exposed us. Exposed the cracks that had already existed. Exposed the longing we had tried to bury. Exposed the fact that whatever happened next wouldn't be about denying what we felt. It would be about deciding what it meant. The man by the window stepped closer one last time, stopping just within reach. This doesn't disappear just because the sun's up, he said quietly. I knew that. I felt it in the way the air still hummed faintly between us. In the way my husband's gaze moved between us, not with suspicion but with calculation. The connection was deeper now, not because of what we did, but because of what we admitted. And as morning light filled the room completely, I realized the real story wasn't about one night. It was about what we would choose to build or break after it. The tension wasn't gone. It had simply changed shape. The rest of the day unfolded slowly, not dramatic, not explosive, just honest. My husband's brother left by noon, unaware of the quiet shift that had reshaped the air in our home. The apartment returned to stillness, sunlight stretching across the floor where rain had dried into faint silver traces. We sat at the dining table together, the three of us, not as conspirators, not as strangers but as people standing at the edge of something real. No one avoided eye contact anymore. That was the difference. I don't want this to be an escape, my husband said finally, fingers loosely wrapped around a mug gone cold. If it's something, it has to be something we choose awake, not just in the dark. His words weren't fragile. They were steady. The man across from him nodded once. I never wanted to take anything from you. And you didn't. My husband replied. Silence settled, but it wasn't heavy now. It felt like space wide enough to breathe. I looked at both of them, really looked at the history in my husband's eyes. Years of shared laughter, shared pain, quiet loyalty that had never once wavered. And at the man who had walked into our lives like a spark, not to destroy but to remind us that fire still existed. This isn't about choosing one over the other, I said softly. It's about choosing truth. The truth was simple, even if it wasn't easy. What happened that night hadn't broken us. It had revealed us. It forced us to confront the distance we'd quietly allowed into our marriage. It forced us to admit that desire doesn't disappear just because life becomes routine. It forced us to speak the things we'd swallowed for years. The man who had once felt like temptation now felt like clarity. And clarity sometimes means letting go. He stood first. Not abruptly, not coldly, just with quiet understanding. "I don't want to be a secret chapter," he said gently. "You two deserve a full story." The words landed softly, but they settled deep. My husband rose too. They faced each other, not rivals, not enemies. Just men who had stood on the same edge and chosen not to push. A handshake would have felt too formal. Instead there was a nod. A look that carried respect instead of resentment. When he turned to me, the air shifted again, but differently now. Less storm, more warmth after rain. He stepped close, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His touch wasn't charged this time. It was tender, grateful. "I'll always be glad we didn't pretend," he said. "So will I whispered. He leaned forward, pressing his lips softly to my forehead, not claiming, not longing, just honoring what had been, and then he left. The door closed gently behind him. No thunder, no breaking, just quiet. I stood there for a moment, letting the memory settle like perfume, subtle, lingering, impossible to ignore but no longer overwhelming. My husband stepped behind me, sliding his arms around my waist. "Are we okay?" he asked again, softer now. I turned in his arms, resting my forehead against his chest. "We're more than okay, because we had chosen. Chosen honesty over fear. Chosen conversation over silence. Chosen each other not out of habit, not out of obligation, but with open eyes." He tilted my chin upward and pressed a slow, warm kiss to my lips, steady and certain. Not urgent, not competing, peace. Outside, the city carried on. Inside, the air felt lighter. The night would always exist, a reminder of what almost broke and what ultimately healed. But it no longer felt dangerous. It felt human. And as his lips rested against my forehead, hands steady at my waist, I realized the most powerful kind of desire isn't the one that consumes you. It's the one that teaches you where you truly belong.